Blake Lively, amazing or apocalyptic? So I gotta look up that writer and see what they think about that now. I'm sure
you have a dream about something, and then that voice inside shows up, and it's like, oh, you could never do it, or you're not good enough, or you know what, a better actor should play that.
Blake Lively just did something that no one, not even her critics, could have scripted better. She tried to silence the internet and ended up putting herself on trial instead. It started with whispers, rumors that Lively wasn't just promoting a movie, but using the courtroom as her personal cleanup crew. Then came the subpoenas, dozens of them, all aimed at everyday people who dared to question her. But here's the twist no one saw coming. The people she targeted, they didn't back down, they lawyered up, they fired back. And what they revealed might just destroy the carefully polished image Blake Lively spent her entire career building. Because this isn't just a story about legal battles or online commentary.
This Cassidy O'Connell's video was very, very interesting. She does a great job. I can't even try to...
It's a story about hypocrisy, power, and what happens when the script flips. And the celebrity becomes the scandal. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll never look at Blake Lively or her perfect PR smile the same way again. Blake Lively was supposed to be untouchable. She wasn't known for scandals. She didn't spark outrage on social media. If anything, she'd mastered the art of staying just enough in the spotlight. Playful on Instagram, picture perfect on red carpets, and always arm in arm with her equally adored husband, Ryan Reynolds. They were the Hollywood it couple everyone loved to love. But all of that started to unravel because of a movie. It Ends With Us wasn't just any project.
This is Blake Lively's brother-in-law, and a journalist who is close friends with him and his family spoke out. Let's take a listen.
It was an adaptation of a painfully personal story about domestic violence, one that had resonated with millions of readers. For survivors, the book was more than a novel. It was a mirror, a lifeline, a raw account of cycles of abuse, the silence of suffering, and the messy, unglamorous path to healing. When the film was announced, many hoped it would shine a spotlight on those realities, maybe even help break the stigma. But that's not what happened. Instead, the promotional campaign became a surreal blend of Fashion Week glam and corporate branding. Blake's interviews were flippant. Promotional content pushed her hair care line. There were cross-promotions with alcohol companies.
This is not deja vu. This is new. This is from July 7th.
Cast members participated in skits that, to some, seemed to mimic the very dynamics of jealousy, control, and dismissal the original story aimed to condemn. And then came the moment that changed everything. Blake laughed during a press appearance when asked about the film's portrayal of abuse. That laughter echoed across the internet. In response, creators, many of them small independent commentators, started raising questions. Some voiced disappointment. Others called out the disconnect between the story's message and its marketing. But none expected what came next. Lawsuits, subpoenas, and a long list of names.
Has a crew member from It Ends With Us speaking out.
Suddenly, content creators were finding themselves named in legal documents filed by Lively's team. Subpoenas were being sent to Google, TikTok, YouTube, Reddit, and X, formerly Twitter. The goal? To unmask the identities of people who had made negative comments about Blake Lively. But this wasn't just about usernames. Her attorneys were demanding IP addresses, geolocation data, financial records, email login histories, even banking information tied to spouses and shared accounts. And why? Because Blake's legal team claimed there might be a coordinated campaign to damage her image. She didn't provide proof, just suspicion, just the possibility that someone somewhere might be working against her.
Oh, by the way, Perez Hilton has confirmed that he is in direct contact with Team Baldoni. That's not a guess, that's not a hint, that's not a maybe. It's right here on Reddit.
To some, it sounded paranoid. To others, it was terrifying. These weren't media companies or political activists. These were regular people. many of whom were survivors themselves, who had simply voiced their opinions on a public platform. And now they were being dragged into a legal dragnet, accused of conspiring against a celebrity they barely knew. One creator recounted the moment she realized what was happening. A knock at the door, a legal notice in her inbox. Her stomach dropped. All because she had uploaded a video questioning the tone of a film trailer. Now her privacy, her safety was in jeopardy. And it didn't stop there.
Okay, Candace Owens finally got served this morning by Blake Lively and her team, and this is what she has to say about it.
Blake's filings allegedly claimed that some creators might have been secretly paid to promote criticism. But no evidence was shown. There were no contracts, no emails, no receipts. Just a sweeping, invasive fishing expedition, backed by the resources of a multi-million-dollar legal team. To some, it looked like a strategic move to silence dissent, a way to send a message. If you speak against Blake Lively, she will find you. She will out you. She will dig into your personal life. Not because of what you did, but because she can. And this is where the narrative cracked.
Without a crystal ball, just discovered the lawsuit that Blake Lively filed in order to get that subpoena sent to Samantha Jones.
Because Blake Lively, the woman who demanded her own privacy in court, was now using that same court to invade the privacy of others. While she fought to keep her financials sealed, she was demanding to see the bank statements of strangers on the internet. While she claimed to be protecting herself from harassment, her team was subpoenaing the IP addresses of abuse survivors. The contradiction was staggering. And soon, people began to ask, was this really about protecting her reputation? Or was this about control? Because this wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. This was a statement, a warning, a way of telling the internet, don't mess with me. But Blake underestimated something critical. She thought these creators would fold under the pressure.
First of all, I want to say that Katie, Without a Crystal Ball, has done some really good work in this case. I've enjoyed watching her channel, and
She thought they would disappear, back down, go silent. They didn't. Instead, they fought back. One by one, they started filing their own motions, some with legal teams, others representing themselves. And what they revealed in those documents would turn this from a PR misstep into a full-blown disaster for Blake Lively. Because what she set out to do, silence the critics, only ended up amplifying their voices. And the first voice to rise up was Cassidy O'Connell. Blake Lively may have expected silence. What she got was Cassidy O'Connell. Cassidy isn't a celebrity. She isn't a lawyer. In fact, she's not even a major influencer.
About 2 weeks ago, I pitched an op-ed to the New York Times about how we did not learn our lesson with Katherine Heigl when it comes to the Blake Lively situation.
But what she is sharp, articulate, and deeply unafraid. And when that subpoena landed on her doorstep, demanding her identity, financial records, and private information, she didn't flinch. She fought back. Cassidy filed a motion to quash the subpoena. And what she delivered wasn't just a legal rebuttal. It was a surgical takedown of Blake's entire case. In her filing, Cassidy laid out the hypocrisy point by point. Blake, she said, had previously refused to release her own financial information in court, citing her constitutional right to privacy. Yet now, she was demanding that Cassidy and others hand over bank account numbers, IP logs, login histories.
The Lively parties subpoenaed a host of third-party witnesses that relate to Wayfair parties.
Even information about spouses or family members they might share finances with. Cassidy called it what it was, a violation, a double standard, and above all, an abuse of power. Miss Lively appears to recognize the basic elements of privacy rights that individuals are entitled to. She wrote, despite her attempts to pierce the rights others are equally entitled to. It was a bold, biting statement, and it hit hard. Because Cassidy wasn't hiding behind technicalities. She was making a moral case, Blake was using the legal system not to defend herself, but to intimidate others. And that wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. But Cassidy didn't stop there. She pointed out that the subpoena wasn't just overly broad.
Someone on Reddit had a really good point that I just found. How exactly did the New York Times get the complaint, if not?
It was potentially unconstitutional. It sought to unmask an anonymous speaker, someone who had committed no crime, someone who was simply engaging in lawful commentary on a public issue. And under the First Amendment, Cassidy argued, that kind of speech was protected. She referenced legal precedents. She cited case law. She even brought up the Stored Communications Act, which protects users from having their private data disclosed without proper legal authority. Blake's team, she claimed, hadn't followed the required procedures, and the court, she insisted, shouldn't tolerate it. And then she made it personal. Cassidy revealed that she had used a pseudonym for her safety.
Blake Lively. My motion is now on the docket. The mainstream media hasn't touched it.
Because she had experienced stalking, sexual assault, and credible threats in the past. She reminded the court that in this very case, Blake's legal filings had already exposed the home addresses of multiple defendants, leading to threats of kidnapping, arson, and physical harm. Cassidy made it crystal clear, if the court allowed Blake to keep digging, real people could get hurt. She didn't just argue for herself, she spoke for every creator caught in the crossfire. And to drive her point home, she offered something rarely seen in legal disputes. She told the court she was willing to sign an affidavit, release an unredacted version to Blake, and even submit to a polygraph, just to prove she wasn't part of any secret conspiracy. She had nothing to hide, she said, because there was no conspiracy to begin with.
I would like to know what kind of blunt force trauma Blake Lively's legal team has suffered to the head, because I have
just outrage, organic, spontaneous, and entirely her own. It's merely a paranoid fantasy, she wrote, of a person who cannot grasp that people do not approve of her actions. Those words didn't just sting, they exploded. They echoed across the docket, across creator circles, and across the very internet Blake had hoped to silence. Cassidy had transformed herself from a subpoenaed target into a public voice for dozens of others too scared to speak. And in doing so, she exposed a larger truth. This wasn't about retaliation. It was about reputation. And Blake Lively, she wasn't protecting hers, she was torching it.
This is a very different video from me. There won't be any silly nicknames.
But just as Cassidy's motion gained attention, another name stepped forward. Another woman who refused to be silent. A woman from across the ocean who had nothing to lose and everything to say. And what she revealed would make Blake's legal tactics look even worse. Her name was Leanne. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get more embarrassing for Blake Lively, another motion hit the docket. This time, not from a creator in California or a blogger in Brooklyn, but from Leanne, a content creator from the United Kingdom. A British citizen, a domestic abuse survivor, a woman who had never met Blake Lively, never spoken to Wayfair, and never imagined she'd be fighting a legal battle in a New York courtroom.
You guys know how Big Bird's husband, Orange Popsicle Face, said that Justin cannot be suing him over hurt feelings?
And yet, here she was, forced to defend her right to speak, her right to privacy, and, as she would argue, her right to be safe. Leanne's motion to quash wasn't just another procedural objection. It was a gut punch, raw, personal, and impossible to ignore. She began with something Blake's team had never expected, a reminder that she is not an American citizen, and that forcing her to comply with subpoenas issued from a foreign court violated multiple international protections. She cited UK privacy laws, US jurisdiction limitations, and even detailed how Blake's legal team had allegedly failed to notify her properly, creating confusion and, as Leanne suspected, doing so deliberately to limit her ability to respond on time.
So once that document is unsealed, What then? What happens if the names of the people that she...
But the legal arguments were just the beginning. What made Leanne's motion explode across social media was her honesty. She didn't hide behind legalese. She told the court that she was a survivor of domestic violence, that the story behind It Ends With Us had personal meaning for her, that she had shared her story online in hopes of helping others, and instead found herself treated like a criminal for expressing disappointment in how the film had been marketed. She wasn't paid, she wasn't part of any conspiracy. She was simply heartbroken. Leanne explained how she had once believed in the film's potential, how she admired Justin Baldoni for taking the subject seriously.
And we're back to our regularly scheduled programming. Hello, my fam, it is Perez, the queen.
But what she saw from Blake's side, jokes, product tie-ins, and tone-deaf red carpet moments, felt like a betrayal. And she didn't just think it, she said it, she posted about it, she made videos, she criticized what felt to her like a mockery of victims. And now, because of that, she was being targeted, unmasked, and legally harassed by a Hollywood millionaire. But Leanne wasn't intimidated. She fought fire with facts. She noted that Ryan Reynolds had already been dismissed from the case. So why was his name still on the subpoenas? Why was his mother portraying an abusive mother-in-law in promotional skits for a film about domestic trauma?
Baby, let the games begin. Are you ready for it? Hello, my fam. It is...
Why had Blake laughed at questions about abuse during press events? Why was the film being used to push beauty products instead of awareness? And then she dropped a line that stunned even Blake's harshest critics. I only knew Blake Lively as Ryan Reynolds' wife, not for any of her own accomplishments. One sentence, that's all it took. A dagger to the ego. A reminder that for all her fame and fortune, Blake Lively had failed to define herself in the eyes of the very people she was suing. But Leanne didn't stop with words. She dissected the subpoena itself, pointing out that Blake's team was demanding login histories, account recovery details, even location tracking data going back months before she'd ever spoken publicly about the case.
And y'all thought I wouldn't be around to update you guys. Well, Justin Baldoni's attorney is responding to Blake Lively's response.
What does my YouTube password recovery method have to do with any of this? She asked the court. What does my bank account in the UK have to do with a lawsuit filed in New York? The answer, as far as she could tell, was nothing, which led her to a chilling conclusion. This wasn't about evidence. It was about punishment. A celebrity throwing her legal weight around to send a message. Cross me and I'll find you. And Leanne wasn't alone in thinking that. She echoed Cassidy's arguments about the Van Zandt sham lawsuit, the earlier case where Blake's legal team allegedly used a thin complaint to subpoena massive amounts of private information.
In her efforts to prove this untraceable smear campaign happened, Blake Lively has sent out subpoenas to Google and
only to quietly drop the lawsuit once they got what they wanted. Leanne warned the court, this is happening again. And if no one intervened, it would set a terrifying precedent. This isn't how justice works, she wrote. This is how intimidation works. The motion was fearless, detailed, passionate, and it tore apart Blake's legal strategy line by line, from jurisdictional flaws to potential violations of free speech laws in both the US and UK, and perhaps most importantly, it rang true. Because here was a woman who had everything to lose and nothing to gain from speaking out. She wasn't famous, she wasn't monetized, she wasn't even American.
This is legit a branding PR disaster. If there wasn't a PR crisis before for Blake Lively,
she was just angry, hurt, and unwilling to be bullied into silence. Leanne didn't just add fuel to the fire, she added credibility. And by the time her motion was filed, people across the internet weren't asking whether Blake was overreacting. They were asking whether Blake was actively weaponizing the court system against women like Cassidy and Leanne. Which brings us to the moment where Blake Lively's strategy truly began to collapse. Because Cassidy and Leanne were just the beginning. And what happened next made it very clear. This wasn't just a PR crisis. It was a public revolt. By now, the public had seen enough to raise eyebrows.
Hell yes. Judge Lyman's making some calls early this morning, and Lauren at Court of Random Opinion.
But what they didn't know, and what Cassidy and Leanne would soon expose, was that this wasn't Blake Lively's first time playing legal hardball. Because months before she started targeting online creators, there had been another case, one that came and went quietly. A case few people understood until now. It was called the Van Zandt Sham lawsuit. At first glance, the Van Zandt case looked ordinary, a legal filing by Blake's team against a relatively unknown defendant. But when you dig deeper, it's not just suspicious. It's downright disturbing. According to the creators now fighting back, Blake's legal team used that earlier lawsuit as a Trojan horse.
Well, Blake Lively has now subpoenaed creators here. On TikTok, 7 creators.
A pretext to subpoena massive amounts of private data. They allegedly filed claims with minimal evidence, just enough to make the paperwork look legitimate. And then they used it to access emails, messages, and even an entire phone's contents from one of the Wayfair defendants. And once they got what they wanted, the lawsuit quietly vanished. No trial, no public resolution, just silence. To Cassidy and Leanne, this wasn't a coincidence. It was a tactic, one now being repeated on a much larger scale. Their motions argued that Blake's new subpoenas followed the exact same blueprint.
This just keeps getting better and better. And by better and better, I mean Blake keeps looking worse and worse, which I find to be hilarious because she's terrible.
File questionable claims, cast a wide net of suspicion, use legal pressure to obtain private information, drop the case, and walk away with everything. Except this time, they weren't going to let her walk away quietly. Cassidy directly cited the Van Zandt lawsuit in her filing, calling it the very basis of Blake's retaliation claims. Leanne echoed it in hers, warning the court that Blake's legal team, from the same law firm, Manat, Phelps and Phillips, was treating lawsuits like weapons instead of judicial tools. And they didn't stop there. Both creators cited Sandals Resorts versus Google, a landmark New York case about defamation and online anonymity.
For all you people out there who think that Justin Baldoni's attorney is not a good lawyer,
the ruling was clear. You can't unmask anonymous speakers unless you prove the speech was both false and harmful. And even then, only with substantial evidence. Blake's team hadn't met that standard, not even close. In fact, Cassidy pointed out that Blake's claims weren't even based on statements of fact, but on opinions, protected speech under the First Amendment. The precedent was clear. And yet, Blake was pushing forward anyway, as if the law didn't apply to her. It was a bold gamble, but now that gamble was unraveling in real time. Because by invoking the Van Zandt lawsuit,
oh my God, she was not expecting this.
Cassidy and Leanne weren't just arguing for their own protection. They were accusing Blake of abusing the legal system, of filing lawsuits with no intent to win, but every intent to punish, of turning the court into a stage for revenge. And that accusation hit different. This wasn't just about one bad subpoena. It was about a pattern, one that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence or overreach. Because if Blake used the Van Zandt case to obtain sensitive information without a proper foundation, and if she was doing it again now, then this wasn't incompetence. It was calculated. And once that idea took root, public opinion began to shift in a very dangerous direction.
You've probably seen this headline, or if you're tracking the docket, you will have noticed that
against Blake. Because if this was a witch hunt, as Blake's attorneys claimed, then people were starting to wonder, who's really holding the torch? Blake Lively built her image on being one of the good ones. She spoke at women's empowerment events. She made headlines for her charity work. She branded herself as a modern advocate, a mother, a wife, and a woman who believed in safety, privacy, and justice. And for years, the public believed her. But now, in the courtroom she weaponized and the filings she orchestrated, that image was starting to crack. And behind it was a very different version of Blake Lively. Because the irony couldn't be ignored anymore.
Welcome back to The Emily Show at its new permanent time on Mondays, living on the Quick Bits YouTube channel and...
The subpoenas Blake sent out weren't just invasive. They were going after women, many of whom were survivors. Women who had experienced stalking, harassment, domestic violence. Women who had found community and catharsis through their content. And now those same women were being told by a millionaire actress that their opinions were dangerous. Let that sink in. Blake Lively, the self-proclaimed advocate for women's voices, was demanding that the court strip those women of their anonymity, invade their bank accounts, and track their digital footprints, all because they said things she
Hey guys, I'm just letting everyone know Blake Lively posted this video of her getting ready before a big event, and
and she wasn't doing it quietly. In court filings, her attorneys implied that creators who had spoken out against the film might be part of some organized smear campaign, potentially even funded, but no proof was offered. No contracts, no communications, no conspiracies. Just the assumption that these women couldn't possibly have come to these opinions on their own. Cassidy and Leanne dismantled that narrative, piece by piece. They argued that the criticism Blake was receiving wasn't artificial. It was organic, real, earned. And by treating it like an attack instead of accountability, Blake was silencing the very people her film was supposed to support.
And the reason why she is so desperate to tie content creators into this scheme is because publicly
Cassidy wrote it plainly. Miss Lively demands protections for herself that she refuses to extend to others. Leanne took it even further, calling Blake's actions a betrayal, not just of survivors, but of the values her movie pretended to promote. And if that wasn't enough, Blake's promotional strategy only made things worse. Instead of centering the film's original message, domestic abuse awareness, the campaign became about products, punchlines, and partnerships. Hair care lines, alcohol brands, a floral-themed press tour. Skits where cast members, including Ryan Reynolds, portrayed emotionally manipulative partners for laughs.
What's going on here and what is in this suit? Because there are some notable things in this lawsuit that we do not see in all civil litigation.
For survivors like Leanne, it wasn't just tone deaf, it was devastating. She recounted how she had once believed the film would make a difference, how she had shared her own story online in solidarity, and how she now felt mocked, erased, and hunted for doing so. It wasn't just a misstep, it was a collapse of everything Blake claimed to represent. Because when push came to shove, Blake didn't amplify women's voices. She tried to control them. She didn't protect privacy, she tried to pierce it, and she didn't encourage accountability, she punished it. And that shift from advocate to accused is what finally tipped public opinion. No longer was Blake being seen as the misunderstood celebrity caught in an online firestorm.
This is a very different video from me. There won't be any silly nicknames.
Now, she was the one holding the match. And instead of burning away criticism, she was igniting more of it. With every subpoena, every filing, every attempt to claw back control. In trying to silence the backlash, she amplified it. And if she thought the damage was done, she was wrong. Because what came next would hit even harder, not from lawyers or legal filings, but from the very film she tried to protect. Because the movie meant to uplift survivors. It was about to collapse under the weight of her decisions. It Ends With Us was supposed to be powerful. It was based on Colleen Hoover's best-selling novel,
But the judge agreed that he can't be suing Ryan for hurt feelings.
A raw, vulnerable story inspired by the abuse Hoover's own mother endured. The book didn't glamorize trauma, it didn't make it pretty. It told the truth, that love can coexist with fear, that abuse doesn't always look like bruises, and that walking away can feel like the hardest thing in the world. So, when the movie adaptation was announced, many survivors held their breath. They hoped it would open eyes, start conversations, help others recognize the red flags they had missed in their own lives. And with Justin Baldoni, an actor known for championing empathy and social causes, directing the film, expectations were high. But then, the promotion started.
So once that document is unsealed, what then? What happens if the names of the people that she...
And it was nothing like what people expected. There were no PSAs, no interviews about the realities of abuse, no heartfelt moments of advocacy. Instead, the rollout looked like a lifestyle campaign for a summer wedding. Blake Lively in pastel florals, hair care promotions, champagne partnerships, beauty sponsorships. And then came the tagline, grab your friends, wear your florals, and come cry together. Cry for what? Over which shampoo? Over a traumatized protagonist who is now being used to sell conditioner? The tone was off. No, it was worse than off. It was offensive, and survivors noticed. In interviews, Blake Lively laughed off questions about the film's message.
Baby, let the games begin. Are you ready for it? Hello, my fam. It is Perez.
At times, she seemed dismissive, even mocking, of the very themes the film was supposed to address. And while Justin Baldoni tried to remain vocal about domestic abuse, he was increasingly sidelined during the press tour. Instead, what took center stage were celebrity cameos and cringeworthy skits. Ryan Reynolds appeared in one as a jealous husband, Hugh Jackman as a jealous best friend. Even Ryan's mother got a cameo as a jealous mother-in-law, all while the camera zoomed in on a male actor's clothed backside, as if domestic trauma was a punchline. Critics were horrified. What started as a story of survival was being sold like a fashion-forward rom-com.
This just keeps getting better and better. And by better and better, I mean Blake keeps looking worse and worse, which I find to be hilarious because she's terrible.
There was no trace of the original intent, no mention of abuse support services, no collaboration with DV advocacy groups, just glamour, giggles, and product placement. And people weren't just disappointed, they were furious. Leanne, a survivor herself, said it best. They hijacked a film that was meant to benefit vulnerable people and used it to promote themselves and their businesses. The backlash grew. Across social media, creators started speaking out, not just about the tone-deaf marketing, but about the deeper betrayal underneath it. How could a film built on trauma erase the very pain it was supposed to honor? How could someone like Blake, who claimed to stand with women, turn around and laugh at questions about abuse?
For all you people out there who think that Justin Baldoni's attorney is not a good lawyer.
And most damning of all, how could she then sue the very people who were holding her accountable? It was more than just a marketing misfire. It was a complete erasure of the film's soul. The people most invested in this story, the readers who had cried through the book, the survivors who had found healing in its pages, now felt discarded, mocked, branded as troublemakers for daring to speak up. And Blake's attempt to silence them only poured gasoline on the fire. Because what started as disappointment over a trailer had now become something far bigger, a reckoning. Not just with how celebrities handle criticism, but with how they exploit causes they don't truly care about.
Now TikTok.
For all you
But they're
people
not just
out there
any
who
kind of
think that
users.
Justin
They're bots.
Baldoni's attorney
And
is not
they've
a
joined
good
TikTok
lawyer.
And the next section, that's where the full collapse begins. When it becomes clear that what Blake dismissed as a smear campaign was something very different. It was a movement. And it was only getting louder. Blake Lively's team insisted this wasn't backlash, it was sabotage. They called it a coordinated smear campaign. They claimed creators across YouTube, Reddit, TikTok, and X were secretly conspiring to destroy her reputation. And not just with words, but possibly with funding. That was the alleged bombshell, the reason behind the subpoenas. According to court filings, Blake's team suspected that these creators were being paid by outside forces.
Oh my God! She was not expecting this! Hello,
maybe even by one of the defendants in the Wayfair case, to manufacture outrage, manipulate public perception, and attack her online. It sounded like a conspiracy ripped straight out of a courtroom thriller. There was just one problem. They had no proof, no emails, no bank transfers, and no contracts, not a single document suggesting a shred of coordination. But that didn't stop them from demanding everything. IP addresses, financial records, login histories, metadata, even the identities of people who shared bank accounts with these creators. As if posting a critical video was some kind of covert operation worthy of federal surveillance. To the creators being targeted, it was more than overreach.
Not Blake Lively getting ready with somebody taking a dump right here next to her. Yeah, she posted this.
It was insulting. Cassidy O'Connell fired back in her motion. Miss Lively cannot grasp that people do not approve of her actions. It's merely a paranoid fantasy. And the more you looked at the backlash, the more obvious it became. This wasn't organized sabotage. It was organic outrage from people across the world with no coordination, no contact, and no shared objective beyond calling out hypocrisy. They weren't connected by a secret group chat. They were connected by disappointment. Disappointment in how a film meant to speak for survivors had become a personal brand accessory.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we're gonna have to rename this movie to It Never Ends because Justin Baldoni has just...
Disappointment in how a celebrity once seen as an advocate now appeared to be using her power to stalk, silence, and subpoena her critics. Creators like Leanne and Cassidy made that clear. They voluntarily offered sworn affidavits stating they'd received no payment, no direction, and no communication from any party connected to the lawsuit. Leanne even said she would submit to a polygraph and make an unredacted copy of her affidavit available to Blake's attorneys, because there was nothing to hide. Except maybe on Blake's side, because while she insisted she was protecting her reputation from a coordinated attack, she refused to provide her own financial records in court.
Is she great?
Yes.
What
did you love about her?
I just love that she was just like an amalgamation of contradiction.
She demanded privacy for herself while stripping it away from others. She claimed to fight for women, while legally pursuing the very women her movie was supposed to uplift. And with every new motion to quash, the pattern became harder to deny. This wasn't a lawsuit, it was a witch hunt. The irony? In trying to unmask her critics, Blake Lively only revealed more of herself. Not the curated version from interviews or magazine spreads, but the one hidden behind legal filings, media spin, and a desperate attempt to regain control. Because this wasn't about proving a conspiracy. It was about punishing criticism.
Justin Baldoni is suing the New York Times and dropping receipts on Blake Lively. These are some of her claims and his...
And in doing so, Blake didn't silence her critics. She legitimized them and she gave them a courtroom, a platform, a spotlight. And now the very story she tried to bury was being dissected, motion by motion, in the public eye. But the final blow wasn't just coming from the creators she targeted. It was coming from the very system she thought she could manipulate. Because what happened next would turn her legal strategy into a cautionary tale and expose the courtroom, not the comment section, as the true source of chaos. At first, it looked like damage control, a celebrity pushing back against what she saw as online harassment.
So people ask me about Blake and Justin Baldoni. You know what? Our court system is so over.
But by the time the motions were filed, the creators lawyered up, and the filings began to circulate, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't about reputation, it was about control. Because Blake Lively didn't just call a lawyer, she called for war using the American legal system as her battlefield. And that is where it all started to collapse. In filing after filing, it became clear that this wasn't a normal legal dispute. It wasn't about defending facts. It wasn't about false accusations. It wasn't even about winning. It was about sending a message. If you speak up, I'll find you. She issued subpoenas to platforms like Google, TikTok, Reddit, and X, demanding they reveal the identities and personal information of over 20 different content creators.
There continues to be a lot of speculation and frankly disinformation about Blake Lively's...
Not because they lied, but because they didn't like how she handled a movie. She targeted survivors of domestic abuse. She demanded their IP addresses, geolocation histories, and bank details. She framed it all as necessary for retaliation claims, but never offered evidence that retaliation ever occurred. And now the court was being asked to decide, is this justice or is this celebrity revenge? Cassidy O'Connell and Leanne said what many were afraid to. Blake Lively was using the legal system as a weapon, not a shield. Not to protect herself, but to punish, to intimidate, to silence. And the more motions they filed, the more their words echoed across courtrooms, social media, and mainstream coverage.
Hi, and welcome to Blossom Talk. I am Cassidy Floor, and this has been a really weird day.
They reminded the judge and the public that the First Amendment isn't a suggestion. That freedom of speech exists precisely to protect voices critical of power. That anonymous commentary, especially when related to a public figure, is not just legal. It's vital. If Blake's subpoenas were allowed to succeed, it wouldn't just chill speech, it would freeze it. Because what she was asking for set a terrifying precedent. That any celebrity, any billionaire, any powerful figure who felt offended could launch a legal inquisition into the lives of everyday people and get away with it. And that's why Cassidy and Leanne weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for every voice that had ever dared to speak truth to power.
And her hair is down to here. Okay, I've had
every creator who thought their small platform protected them. Every survivor who found courage online only to be threatened into silence. This was no longer a PR problem, this was a test of the system itself. Because if the court sided with Blake, it would send a message louder than any subpoena. That the powerful can erase criticism. Not with facts, but with force. But the opposite was already happening. Every document filed, every motion submitted, every refusal to be silenced. It all told a different story, one Blake Lively never intended to create. A story of people fighting back, of women standing together, of truth clawing its way through carefully constructed PR.
Quickly, I know I said that on Thursday that was our series finale of the Justin Baldoni case, but I lied. Whatever, who cares?
And the more she tried to suppress it, the louder it became. This wasn't supposed to happen. Blake Lively set out to protect her image. What she did instead was shatter it. She tried to silence criticism and ended up amplifying it. She's tried to control a conversation and ended up fueling a movement. She turned to the courts for power, and in doing so, exposed just how fragile that power really is. Because in the end, this wasn't about a movie, and it wasn't about a smear campaign. And it definitely wasn't about justice, or it was about what happens when someone's so used to being adored.
All right, guys, I'm just preemptively letting you know that today is already insane for 1,000 reasons, but Blake Lively hiring...
So used to being untouchable, finally hears the word no from people who won't back down. And the truth is, that's what made this story matter, not the celebrities, not the lawsuits, but the women who refused to be erased. The survivors who said, this is not okay. The creators who said, we're not afraid. They stood their ground not just for themselves, but for everyone watching. Because what Blake Lively didn't seem to understand is that free speech isn't something she gets to approve. It isn't a brand, and it isn't a hashtag, it's a right. And sometimes when people with microphones speak up against people with power, it changes everything. So if Blake thought this would end the conversation, she was wrong. It's only just begun.